with a lot of different ways that the games can play out. So I'm excited to see, what the opening hands deliver, how the players choose to approach the matchup. I think it's going to be good stuff.
Yeah. All right. And here we go. We are off and running with both players taking a look at their opening hands here. We see Corey with lands, Faithful Mending, Goryo's Vengeance. That's a lot of the pieces you want and a grief. Meanwhile, Carmen, uh, no early mana dork, but lands and spells. It's good enough with the Bowmasters to keep it.
Yeah, so look how cool Corey's hand is. Like he has so many ways he can approach the game. Either he can go Faithful Mending to dig and try to set up Goryo's Vengeance. He can do like he can scam either elemental, right? Like he can do
Hmm.
Grief, pitching Goryo's Vengeance, and blink it with Touch the Spirit Realm. Or he knows he's against a creature deck, so he can
Right.
wait for the board to develop, do the same thing with Solitude. Just so many options available to him. And it looks like he did not choose to do the Grief scam, which I think, that's a pretty face value play that I think a lot of people would have been tempted into.
Yeah, I mean, it would make sense, right? Especially Carmen doesn't do much. You want to just kind of peek at it and see what's going on over there. But maybe Corey trying to keep it open later. Now, we talked when you and Carmen were playing about Corey's approach to the matchup from someone who sat on the other side of Golgari Yawgmoth a lot, and he talked a lot about how his plan was to just keep the board clear as much as possible.
Mhm.
So that might speak to him valuing the solitude really highly. And as we see, he actually pitches the grief to the faithful mending.
Yeah, it actually makes a lot of sense. Like for people who played Modern 6 months ago, we all kind of lived in fear of the double grief turn.
Right.
Feeling like that was almost insurmountable. But this is actually not a matchup where, discard 2 cards and I have a 3/2 menace. That's not necessarily going to win. If Corey expends a lot of resources and the game continues for a while,
Yeah.
he might actually regret having used so much to do the grief. So I like the way he's approaching the game, even though it was not necessarily intuitive at first glance.
Well, and it certainly looks like it's setting up for him here because Carmen without the mana acceleration and being on the draw, really kind of behind the 8 ball to start this one. And Bowmasters on turn 2 looks like a pretty good play, but Corey's able to use that archaeologist to just set up his graveyard. Now there's an Atraxa in there. He's got a Vengeance in hand. He's messing with us here in the booth by switching up his Goryo's Vigilance art, but it still does the same thing.
So the only way this game continues is if Carmen chooses to play Agatha's Soul Cauldron this turn to
Hmm.
have some protection against Corey's combo. It does look like that's the direction she's going, but that was sort of a preliminary test, so to speak.
Yeah, very heads up play on her part here to realize that any creature in the graveyard that you have an opportunity to interact with, you will not get another opportunity most likely. So you should take it, and that's what she's going to aim to do here with the Agatha Soul Cauldron, and we're kind of developing into this sort of long, grindy-ish, for modern anyway, long game where that solitude that you brought up earlier is looking like it's probably going to provide quite a bit of value.
Yeah, so at any point that he chooses, Corey could go pitch Touch the Spirit Realm, evoke Solitude, ephemerate it, and that results in, I mean, exiling 3 creatures, super
Yeah.
powerful. It's going to be tricky for him to set up Goryo's Vengeance, though not impossible. Remember, it is an instant, so if Carmen puts the shields down at the wrong time,
Hmm.
then he could still potentially make something happen. So again, just a ton of options for both players, and this is exactly, you know, what was on my wish list. Is just getting a game like
Right.
this where we have cat and mouse, we have different directions that the players can go, and a lot of cool stuff going on.
Well, here is certainly step one if you're Carmen, which is exile the Atraxa underneath the Soul Cauldron. So Corey doesn't have. I'd have to check his graveyard, but he has maybe a discard outlet in hand, but nothing to reanimate in the yard outside of a grief, and none of the true powerhouses in hand to discard either. Access to the Faithful Mending if he wants to flash it back. So he's going to untap gated more by mana than spells he's able to cast. He just has to decide what actually matters with the game at this point with an active Soul Cauldron going for Carmen and 4 cards in her hand.
Yeah, so I think what Corey identified is that okay, Carmen has a good position. This is pretty scary, but this is maybe my one shields down moment. So he's going to use the ephemerate to dig
Hmm.
6 cards into his graveyard, and he actually did find Atraxa right away on the first try. So
Huge
he's
hit there.
using this window to combo off, and I think Corey's, you know, oh, I don't know if gamble is the right word, but more just giving himself every opportunity to capitalize. It did pay off, and he's probably going to win the game now.
Yeah, he what an incredible turn there. Carmen does what she needs to do to take control of things. Corey seizing the small window of opportunity, as you mentioned, playing to his outs there, and he finds it right away with that Atraxa hitting the bin, coming back with Goryo's Vengeance, and thanks to this Esper deck in particular, this Atraxa, unlike previous Goryo's Vengeance decks, it will be sticking around thanks to all these blink effects. So this was just an absolute display of how powerful this deck is out of nowhere. Carmen had the ability to interact with the graveyard, took away the Atraxa, and Corey just able to refill and turn it all around immediately. And now, of course, access to almost anything he wants, multiple solitudes in hands, more ephemerates. Uh, what a display from the Esper Blink deck.
Totally, yeah. And you know, you start to play this what if game where you're like, oh, okay, if Carmen had just chosen to never tap the Soul Cauldron, but I'm not even
Right.
sure if that would have worked because then Corey can just take his time developing,
Hmm.
get two things in the graveyard. The Goryo's Vengeance is an instant, so it's he can even exile the Soul Cauldron itself with Touch the Spirit Realm or Prismatic Ending. So there's just so much power at the fingertips of the Goryo's Vengeance player
Yeah.
due to that card being such a cheap instant. You can really take the game in the direction you want it to go.
Well, yeah, and just sort of the 3 card combo or 3 mana combo of it, right? Where Goryo's Vengeance plus Ephemerate means at any point, if you're Carmen and you lower your shields, your mana, your interaction, you can't do anything about it. And it just becomes, ironically, the game that the Golgari deck wants to play, where you just advance your board state with the threat of the combo always omnipresent, especially with Court of Calling. And Corey just turns that right on its heel. And now, of course, it's just going through the motions here to try to clean it up. Has to be careful not to run into any infinite combos or anything like that from Carmen's side. But with the solitudes in hand, Corey just trying to figure out how best to close this one.
Yeah, you
So
make a
what?
good point, Corbin, that
Uh,
both decks are kind of like biding their time to combo off. Both
mhm.
decks, have nice card quality, develop their boards, and then have the kind of I win moment if they're able to capitalize on the opportunity. And I wonder if that's sort of the future of the modern format is going to be lots of decks like this. Underworld Breach comes to mind, or Primeval Titan stuff, where it's like you can play this normal game or you can win out of nowhere.
Well, and that's what made the Rhino shell so strong in the first place, and that I mean, it still exists as a strong shell. Is that it's a package of cards that can fit into a bunch of different decks, and basically, look when Modern Horizons 2 came out and we got all the elementals, people tried really hard to make black white ephemerate a deck. The missing piece all along, well, I mean, outside of Atraxa, was Goryo's Vengeance, giving you another like making that line more powerful than just blinking a grief on turn one or turn two. Very, very nice, like just sort of development in modern. And I think you're right. Yeah, the future of the format is going to look a lot um, like decks that can hold up interaction while presenting their own sort of self-contained package of game-winning threats. It's fun stuff to watch, that's for sure. We have these wild games where we go back and forth between Young Wolf beatdowns and Atraxa, draw all the cards in my deck that I could ever want.
Totally.
All right, so checking back in here, Corey makes it through the discard step, and Court of Calling as a pickup over here for Carmen is looking pretty good. So we'll see what she wants to do um, to try and fight back. Corey sitting on Solitude Ephemerate on his end, so anything Carmen does is likely to run into a wall of swords, so to speak.
Yeah, it's amazing to think that, like, even after Corey comboed off and saw the top 20 cards of his library and, played a free grief, that
Mhm.
Carmen is actually not totally out of the game. I expect Corey will find a way to win, if he navigates carefully with this solitude and the ephemerate. It should be enough, but it's easy to imagine, like, if he was just careless or
Right.
targeted the wrong creature,
Fetches at the
um, you
wrong
know,
time.
Ex sure, yeah,
Right.
any of that stuff can happen in Modern, and I think Carmen is rightly still playing this out and looking for every opportunity.
Well, step one, play out of Bowmasters. That's two bodies that can tap for the court calling and provides a little bit of pressure. And so if you are Carmen and you're trying to dig out of this, you just gotta to run out the options you can. And you know what? Grist, maybe targeting Atraxa here to try to kill it. That's a different angle that makes the solitude line not particularly relevant yet. Looks like Corey going to fetch in response here, and this is where I think we might see the ephemerate come out, not to blink a solitude, but instead to save Atraxa and blink it as well. And that'll do it as expected. Corey Baumeister taking game one with Goryo's Vengeance deck. He found his window. You talked about it. He had one window throughout that entire game where sort of the interaction was down from Carmen and it was wide open, and he made the most of it.
Yeah, for sure, the Soul Cauldron is such a scary card, but he was able to just thread the needle and fight through it.
All right, on to the sideboards. And this is where things definitely get pretty interesting. Both players pulling in the options that they want. Now, we saw Corey pull in those Celestial Purges earlier. He has some interaction, but we also saw the 1-for-1 plan from him fail against Yawgmoth. So he's going to have to try to balance that, and it looks like he's kind of cutting around the edges of his reanimation package.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We know that Carmen's gonna bring in 2 Endurances and then, of course, still have access to the main deck,
Hmm.
Agatha's Soul Cauldrons and Scavenging Uses. So there are going to be a lot of games where Goryo's Vengeance is just not going to work for Corey.
Right.
But you talked about and he talked about his plan of he really likes to ferry in the matchup. He's bringing in kind of the maximum amount of removal. So being able to just play this value game is certainly in in his repertoire.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at just looking at his deck here, kind of looks like a control deck, right? A lot of solitudes and griefs to fairies, draw spells, removal spells. And so he's definitely got the ability to interact quite a bit. So, from Carmen's side, what do you want to do? Obviously, you want some amount of graveyard hate, but what does that look like when you're trying to keep your own combos?
Probably also just trimming here and there. I think I'm not a big fan of the reactive stuff. I'd be looking
Hmm.
at maybe like the Maelstrom Pulse and the Walking Ballista as possible cuts. Although there's definitely some spots where those can be great cards too. But yeah, I mean, just exactly what Carmen did of just trimming here and there and maintaining a well balanced deck with a lot of weapons for the games that go along.
All right, and now she'll get to be on the play here. There's an endurance. That's one piece of graveyard interaction. Corey has got a pretty explosive start's the right word. Tainted Indulgence, Atraxa, Goryo's Vengeance. This is one of those super powerful hands the deck is capable
So funny because if you're on Corey's side, you're probably so excited about your opening hand. You're like, oh
of.
man, I've got my mana, I've got my turn 3 combo. But unfortunately, it's just going to match up so poorly against what Carmen happens to have.
That's right. And I
I'm
was
looking
looking,
at
Carmen didn't
scavenging
have.
use.
Sorry, yeah, Carmen didn't have a second green card for that endurance, but the Soul Cauldron itself, of course, can just exile things out of the graveyard if the window presents itself, and that's what Carmen slams down. Shields up, young wolf off to the races. No free win for Corey here. He's going to have to find an alternative game plan.
Yeah, thankfully the Tainted Indulgence can dig, so he's going to get to see 5, 6, 7 new cards in the next couple of turns, especially when you factor in those surveil lands that have pulled so much weight for him.
Hmm.
So we'll see. I think the game is going to look very, very different 2 turns from now.
Yeah, and it's also Corey, depending on how he wants to play, can set up a turn where he tries to discard multiple reanimation targets, and then try to set up if he was able to find more spells. Just as the game goes on and he has access to more mana, uh, the deck can set up lines where it can Goryo's Vengeance in response to whatever you're trying to do. But Carmen San looking pretty okay over there. Third land, and now Yawgmoth joining the party. So we'll see how she wants to progress from here. Does she just want to keep up an endurance? Want to play out scavenging news and just start growing the board? Lots of options. All roads begin with Young Wolf attacking for 1, knocking Corey down to 15. He was able to find off that Tainted Indulgence, a Teferi, Time Raveler. So that is a pretty decent turn 3 play against 1 threat. Against 2 threats, like Carmen now has, it's not quite as great. Still pretty decent for Corey, but maybe not in this spot. Another land, not what he wanted to find.
Yeah, so the Teferi just not quite impressive enough on this board. You can play it and plus to just kind of absorb some damage and hope that you're able to untap with the Planeswalker. You could also just cash it in for a card, say bounce Scavenging Ooze, for example.
Mhm.
Neither of those are awful plays, but it's not what Corey was dreaming of.
Yeah, certainly not when you saw that opening hand. But that's one of the draws to the Goryo's Vengeance deck. As if you are any, I don't want to say any other combo deck, but right, many combo decks in Magic's past, you have your great opening combo hand, and if your opponent had multiple pieces of interaction, well, that was that. Okay, you got it. Good job. This deck, despite Corey's hand being completely stymied by Carmen's opener, we're still well into this game here. He's got a Teferi in play. He did cash it in for a card, as you mentioned. Touch of Spirit Realm can interact a little bit. A 4th land, though, for Carmen means that Yawgmoth mana. How do you like this the walking ballista play? It seems very terrifying compared with Agatha's comboed with Agatha's Soul Cauldron.
Yeah, and I think we might actually see
Might be
something
it.
pretty cool happen now.
Yeah.
So if you get the Walking Ballista under the Soul Cauldron, which Carmen just threw the ballista into the graveyard by
There you
casting
go.
first hero,
Hmm.
now the Young Wolf is going to pick up a counter. You use that counter to shoot Corey. Then
Yep.
you sacrifice the Young Wolf to reset it for another counter, and you repeat the process. And because in this case, Carmen has more life than Corey, those
Right.
couple cheeky attacks with the 1/1 Young Wolf, that means the game is going to be over because every time she iterates this cycle, each player is going to be down 1 life until Corey's eventually at 0.
What an amazing Well, we talked about this. This is sort of the oops part of the deck, right? Sometimes the deck grinds you out. Sometimes it's just, oh, this happens to be a weird 3 to 4 card combination that puts your life to 0. But only because my life is higher. What an ending there. Carmen knotting it up at 1 game apiece.
Yeah, pretty cool too. Carmen and I both brought Yawgmoth decks. I did not play Walking Ballista at all in either my main deck or my sideboard. And
Uh,
then sitting here doing commentary, I've seen it just outright win Carmen 2 different
2
games. So
games,
I'm kind of
yeah.
reconsidering, like, oh, did I miss something here? That's a really cool card, really cool one of.
Yeah, it's not the worst when you play it for X equals 2 or whatever on some of these boards we've seen either, right? And worst case scenario in your Yawgmoth mirror, it's still directed damage and instant speed. It's been a very powerful one for Carmen for sure. And now has her just one win away from joining you in the winners pod of the MTGO Masters here in a few weeks. Corey is looking at a grief prismatic ending hand. Don't know if that's exactly where he wants to start as he tries to do the same with Goryo's Vengeance and deep into the mulligan tank here for Goryo.
So all 5 matches tonight, three games, lots of close ones. I mean, it's you
Yeah.
can't draw it up any better than that. Corey, unfortunately, is going to be down to 5 cards, though he found a nice functional
Sure.
5. This is actually his control game plan,
Yeah.
removal spells into his planeswalker. Let's see if that works for him.
It could be very powerful. It looks like I can't tell if Carmen has mold too or not, but not an incredibly explosive hand we're looking at out of her. So, all right, both players starting off a little, going to be a little bit handicapped to start the game, a little stymied within their development. So, great setting for our final game of the match here. Everyone has gone 3. This has been very good.
Corbin, I just wanted to give you little props for bringing the really sweet, off metagame deck. How was your mill experience tonight?
Well, thank you. It was a ton of fun. I'll tell you, my nerves tonight were off the charts playing with you all. I'll be honest. I doing commentary, no problem. Actually playing Magic, I'm just shaking. It's wild. But I had a ton of fun playing, and it was Mill is great, right? Like everyone loves Mill. When I was trying to pick out my deck, I went to the Mill Discord. Shout out to them; they were awesome. Gave me a lot of tips to help me to learn how the deck works. So it was fun to showcase it off here in the MTGO Masters because you see all of this when you play a league on Magic Online.
Yeah, we appreciated watching it. I mean, it made for some really, really cool games. And now, if I could say so, you got it out of your system, because we have a cool structure here with the Mitko Masters that you don't bring the same deck twice. So
Right?
now, you played.
Well, it's certainly looking like the best deck right now because you, of course, went 2-0 with it, and Carmen is looking like she's in a pretty decent spot here against Corey. Corey had that control game plan. It would have been a lot better if he could have curved out those prismatic endings into the Teferi. Instead, he wasn't. And now Carmen is starting to develop creatures. Has got Grists in hand, access to endurance. The lockdown is starting to develop here as Corey is already facing down cards to try to dig out of. Now, he does have access to an Atraxa in his graveyard. So if he can find a way to reanimate it, he'll have a start, but a long way to go.
It's over, or that we're counting Corey out, but Carmen seems to have every angle covered pretty
Mhm.
nicely at least in this snapshot of time.
Yeah, just piece by piece, building up the, the wall to Corey's combo. And looking like the play this turn is going to be to deploy one of these 2 Grists. Go from there. Does this, do you think, I mean, Grist in this place, you see it minus to kill creatures a lot. Have you ever seen it minus to kill an archaeologist?
That's an interesting question. I don't think so. And that is a play that you could make. It actually looks really strong on this board. Pump up my young wolf in order to kill your blocker and start attacking. But Carmen has to be really, really mindful of a possible ephemerate
Correct. Yeah.
to make a play like that. So I'm not sure if that's what we're going to see this turn, but
Yeah.
definitely
And of
on the
course,
table.
the thing is, if it's worth killing, you'd want to kill the archaeologist so it can't be ephemerated. But if Corey has ephemerate, then that play doesn't work anyway. So
Right.
Carmen thought it through, opted for the jailer instead. Now, this is an interesting card. Permanent cards in graveyards can't enter the battlefield. Well, that's a card Corey has to do.
Yep. So that definitely turns off Corey's combo, which in some games wouldn't be a big deal, but after the mulligan to 5, he needs
Mhm.
something to go right. Um, Interestingly, the Soulless Jailer does impact Carmen too, so the young wolf can't return from
True.
undying.
True. Okay. Well, Corey has decided to open with Teferi, and Carmen thinking it through, correctly not forgetting about the Teferi passive, which is always a challenge, and is just going to pull the trigger in response to Teferi with an endurance to target Corey's graveyard. Send that Atraxa packing right now, and then we'll deal with Teferi later.
Wow, this is a really conservative, safe play from
Mhm.
Carmen because uh, she doesn't want to have the Teferi enter the battlefield and then be locked out of casting endurance.
Right.
Now, one thing that could have happened is she could have played Orcish Bowmasters, or there's already one on the battlefield. So if Corey was to -3 Teferi,
Mhm.
oh man, there's so much going on here. I'm trying to think. Like,
No,
so
you're
Corey could
right.
go,
You're right. They could have. It would have got Teferi off the board and unlocked the endurance.
but
Uh,
I have to correct myself
right.
even as I'm walking through it because you can -3 the soul on the Soulless Jailer, get that off the battlefield, then you'll draw a card, and there will be an Orcish Bowmaster trigger.
Yes.
And at that moment, Corey could use the instant speed Goryo's Vengeance, and that would actually be a window. So Carmen did all that calculus right on the fly, and made sure that she protected herself from the possible combo.
These matchups are fun, aren't they?
Totally.
That's
And
that's
I think
great.
that was a correct play for Carmen based on how she's significantly ahead in the game. But she had to expend a lot of resources for it. So given
Mhm.
that Corey actually wasn't on the Goryo's Vengeance plan, it
Right.
did result in the game being a lot closer.
Yeah, because now Carmen has this board of, again, sort of the small 1/1 armies that the Yawgmoth deck produces so much, and she does crucially have Yawgmoth in hand, but we'll need to find an opportunity to deploy it. Currently, Corey has a blocker. In fact, a blocker that favorably trades with Carmen's creatures and a Teferi and access to removal when he untaps. So this Grist is going to need to do some work here for Carmen, and that's looks like what she's up to. Up what she's going to do with it here is going to use it for the removal option.
Man, you said it, Corbin. It's like we see one game where Corey blinks Atraxa and accesses the top 30 cards of his library. He's
Right.
discarding a hand size, doing all this crazy stuff. And then we see the next game where, like, wow, a 1/4 blocker. How is anyone ever going to beat a 1/4 blocker?
Yeah, that's it's oh, modern Magic is fun. It reminds me a lot of how Legacy. I haven't played a lot of Legacy, but everyone runs each other out of resources, and then whatever's left over to win gets the job done, and that describes Yawgmoth to a T. Because that's what's happening here. Corey is down to just a prismatic ending in hand, an uncastable Atraxa, and Atraxa he can't get into his graveyard, and Carmen's about to untap into Yawgmoth. So Corey's going to cast the one spell he does have access to, which is Prismatic Ending. Get Grist out of here. So, from his seat, this is you're looking okay here. If Carmen doesn't have anything too powerful, we know that she in fact does have access to those.
Yeah, remember the Yawgmoth somewhat weakened by the presence of the Soulless Jailer. So it's actually kind
Right.
of fortunate for Corey that he didn't wind up putting a removal spell at that creature. Um, But yeah, definite advantage to Carmen right now. One thing I will point out is Corey has a blue-green dual land in his deck.
Mhm.
So there's a world where this could go long enough, he could draw a couple lands, and he actually just casts that Atraxa.
Especially with Grief taking the Bowmasters now out of Carmen's hand, Corey is suddenly facing down one less threat coming and has a creature of his own in play. And the second Young Wolf, you mentioned it with the Jailer in play, is it's nerfed while that's around.
Yeah, so I
Yep.
think what's gonna happen is Carmen's gonna sacrifice the Jailer and
Hmm.
then effectively just start comboing.
Yep. Yep.
With
Here
the high
we
life
go.
total, I
Yeah.
expect this will be game over. So for those who are not familiar with
I was going to say,
Yawgmoth,
you want to walk through the short version of what Carmen's doing here?
the goal is to loop the two undying creatures. You see, sacrifice one young wolf, it comes back with a +1/+1 counter. Then you sacrifice the other young wolf to put a -1/-1 counter, and those two counters cancel each other out. So you basically reset the young wolf and can repeat the process. Now, this is not an instant win combo, but what Carmen can do is basically draw cards equal to the amount of life she's willing to pay, and Corey sees the writing on the wall, and he elects to concede. So that's Carmen scoring the 2-1 and advancing to the winner's pod for the next round.